Karen, thank you for that useful introduction to the broader ICI program. I'm going to present a vision of what we might try and do. It's been arrived at with some limited dialogue. Clearly, then, what I'm looking for, and I think the collective exercise here, is decide how best to push this enterprise forward. But it begins with a fairly lofty goal, I think, not an unachievable one, I think. 5 million specimens, 500,000 species. That's a 20-fold increase from where we are today over a 5-year period. Given the things we've learned over the last while, I think it's achievable. A time frame of 5 years seems nicely symmetric. And then finally a price tag of $150 million, which seems slightly audacious by biological standards, I would say. But perhaps not so audacious when you see the size of some of the projects that Karen has just mentioned, and perhaps even less audacious when you consider the investments that are made in cosmology on a rather regular basis. So the new Gemini telescope saw first light in 1999 with a price tag of $184 million. And you can see the array of large telescopes, land-based telescopes, that are being activated over the next few years. Very large, Giant Magellan Atacama. The extremely large telescope project is being led by Canada, actually, as one of the lead nations, and it's an $800 million project. And the EU doesn't want to be overdone, so the overwhelmingly large telescope is looming. I think you can see where this is going. The ultimately, overwhelmingly, staggeringly large telescope, and it will cost many, many, many billions of dollars. So I think the cosmological community well understands the value of working together and large projects, and this is a tradition which has been embraced by a number of other big science disciplines, but I think it's not part of our tribal culture. It's something we need to change. We know we've got a giant problem on this planet, inventorying biodiversity. And so I think we have to start thinking in terms of projects that are $150 million and opening new apertures of funding, Dan, the same ones that are being used to fund the telescopes. So as we thought about the way in which we might move this project forward, it seemed reasonable. Well, first of all, this is a project that can't be done by one or two nations. So I would say it's very different from the Structural Genomics Consortium, and many other big genomics projects can be done by a small number of nations. This requires a big, broad partnership. And the question is how much and how to approach that, what sort of levels of investments from each of the partners. Should they be equal or should they be varied? And it seemed as if it might be appropriate to have staged investment levels. And nations could move from one level to the next as their involvements in energy grew. So we began with the notion of 3 central node nations that would play a substantial role and spend more in terms of invest more in the project to begin. Regional nodes, 7 regional nodes, and we'll hear a little bit more about their varying activities, but as the name suggests, those nations would play an important role in orchestrating barcode activity within their national boundaries, but also reach out to nations in proximity. And then finally, developing nodes, those nations that want to enter the enterprise, have a capacity to contribute, a strong capacity to contribute, and that might well, in some cases, make a transition in a very short period of time to a regional node. And in fact, we're already seeing signs of that in some of the nations that are listed as developing nodes, I would say. So this is the International Consortium Initiative in terms of its founding membership. I'm not sure that we want to aim in the first instance, but I could be wrong here, for United Nations of barcoding just this early. I think if we get a really large array of nations, David, perhaps all 45 nations that are currently involved in iBOL, this might raise, it will be a serious administrative challenge. So it seemed worthwhile to start with a smaller group, not to close the doors to other national involvements, but that the formal membership would be some nations where we could concentrate the fundraising effort and scientific involvements. That may be a problem. So the total funding, I think, is within the envelope. It's a little bit longer program than the programs that Karen has talked about. The ICI typically looks for 3-year investments. We argued, and many of you were involved in helping assemble this application, saw earlier versions of it. We argued for a 5-year funding investment. Things have changed a little bit since the application went to Genome Canada. as we looked at figures in terms of the costs of doing the analysis, and the initial figure in the letter of intent was $100 million. It didn't seem as if it would be possible to execute the work with that amount of money. We had a board meeting of the Canadian Network at which some of the issues relating to this project and Canada's involvement were looked at, and Canadian agencies, representatives that were on our board, argued that we should raise the number to the value that we thought, the amount that we thought would take to get the job done. So that led to an increase in the budget figure to $150 million as a target, and actually a decline in the number of specimens processed because a letter of intent suggested we might do 10 million specimens, but it seemed as if it would be difficult to do that well with a budget of $100 million. The species count has remained the same. That's perhaps the most critical part of the exercise, is driving up species coverage. 10 replicates per species as opposed to 20 doesn't seem to be a huge loss for the program. The investments, greater than $25 million for central nodes. So the central nodes, over that 5-year period, would be expected to find that much money towards the advance of this project.